Okay, in this PowerPoint we're going to take a look at chapters 5, 6, and 7, which focuses on listening, audience analysis, and adapting to your audience during your presentation. Okay, take a look at the image here you see in the center of the screen. From these four categories, we spend more time listening than we do either speaking, reading, or writing. So listening is an extremely important component of communicating, whether you're listening to audience nonverbal cues as a speaker or whether you're listening to the presenter and paying attention to his or her verbals and nonverbals during their presentation. Okay, as a listener, and as an audience member, it's important to pay attention and select the message being delivered by the presenter, both verbally and non-verbally. That allows you to then attend to it and really get engaged with what they are saying. Then that will help you to understand and interpret, make sense, or give meaning to that message or those messages. Then, of course, you can remember that information and then afterwards respond appropriately to it. And there are different ways that you can respond appropriately. One way is, of course, if you remember that information after that presentation, hopefully you can take knowledge and then use it after that presentation is complete. Okay, to listen better, it's important to pay careful attention to both verbals and nonverbals. So listen with your eyes as well as your ears. What is the total message being delivered by the presenter? What is he or she saying verbally, and then what is he or she saying non-verbally? There are lots of components to nonverbal communication, such as posture, eye contact, tone of voice, and many others, how they're dressed, for example. So pay careful attention to all these when you're really listening to what the speaker is saying. And then also you can adapt to that speaker's delivery. Some speakers will speak a little faster, some a little slower. Different people have different delivery styles. Each person has their own unique personality and therefore their own unique delivery style. Try to get in tune with that person's delivery style so you can try and receive as much important content as possible. And as you're doing this, you really are listening mindfully and, in my opinion, also trying to listen skillfully to really pay careful attention and filter out any information or any distracting mannerisms that might prevent you from really listening carefully to what the presenter is trying to communicate. Okay, what is your listening style? Are you a people-oriented, action-oriented, content, or time-oriented listener? Knowing your particular listening style can help you better listen to the presenter's message as they deliver their speech in class, as well as presentations you'll see outside of class. As you do all of the things mentioned so far in this presentation, this will help you to become a much more active listener, a much more engaged listener, not just a passive listener. You're really getting engaged with the presenter and what his or her message is. And this will allow you to, of course, listen much more critically. And this will also help you to listen more ethically. In Chapter 6, we focus on audience analysis. You want to try and gather as much information as you can about your audience in advance so you can tailor your message to meet the needs of your audience. Once you've gathered the information, and there are different ways you can gather information, you can analyze that information and then use it to help adapt your message to the needs of the audience. What do they already know about your topic? What do they want to know more about? And ultimately, what are they hoping to get out of your presentation? Knowing this information can go a long way in helping you prepare for your speech or your presentation. Okay, when you adapt to your audience, it's important to consider who the members of your audience are. It's important to consider what is your speech goal. In other words, what are you trying to achieve with your presentation in relation to your particular audience. And this will, of course, help you determine or help you ascertain what to put in your presentation as well as how to deliver it. Okay, As we analyze our audience, it's important to pay attention to certain demographic factors. Some of them include, but are not limited to, group membership, socioeconomic status, of course, which is closely tied to income level, and which is also somewhat related to occupation and education level and or type of education that members of your audience may have. Knowing this, as well as other information related to your audience demographics, can help you adapt to either specific or diverse type of listeners that may exist within your particular audience. In Chapter 7, we'll focus on adjusting your message to your audience as you deliver your presentation. So when you're presenting your first presentation or any of your presentations in this class, hopefully you'll be able to watch and respond to nonverbal cues that you may see from the audience. This can focus on eye contact that you are receiving or may not be receiving from certain members of your audience, as well as facial expressions that you may or may not see from members of your audience. For example, if you see members of your audience who have kind of a puzzling look on their face or a puzzling expression, they might be a little bit unclear about something that you had just explained. So you might want to take a step back and revisit what you just described and maybe explain it in other terms, for example. Okay, things to consider once again, adapting to your audience as you go. Are the members of your audience more individualistic or collectivistic? In other words, do they come from or belong to a culture that focuses on the individual more important as being more important than that of the group membership, or do they come from a culture where the group that they belong to is more important than the individual needs or interests of each individual person? This is closely tied to high and low context communication styles. Individualistic cultures are more closely associated with low context communication, which is more direct communication. Collectivistic cultures are more associated with high context communication, or more subtle, more indirect, more nuanced communication. So once again, high context communication is using more nuance, using more subtle communication, sometimes using more nonverbal cues. Low context communication is being more direct and to the point with your verbal and spoken message. Tell it to me straight, cut to the chase, don't beat around the bush. Those are all expressions associated with low context communication. High or low need for certainty is tied in once again to, if you have a high need for certainty, that means you like to know what's going to happen. And it's very important that you know what's coming up and what's going to happen or what the result of something will be. A low need for certainty means that you don't necessarily have to know exactly what's going to happen. You're more okay with an uncertain outcome or being uncertain exactly how things are going to play out. We talk about high or low power cultures or high or low power distance cultures. High power cultures are when there's an established hierarchy. When I think of high power cultures or cultures with an established hierarchy, I think of government agencies, or I think about the military, because there are very clear steps when it comes to employment. You report to a certain person, that person reports to another person, and there's a very clear chain of command, particularly when I think about the military. When I think of low power examples or low power organizations or communication within low power organizations, there's not as much of a hierarchy. Maybe you work for a small business and you can go and talk to the business owner if you have a question. Say if you work at a restaurant or if you work at a retail store and you want to ask for time off, or you have an important question the customer is asking, you can go straight perhaps to the owner of the business and ask them directly, rather than reporting to a supervisor who might report to another supervisor and then get back to you. Time orientation, we talk about kind of two types of time orientation predominantly: monochronic time orientation and polychronic time orientation. Monochronic time is very punctual, very to the point, very on the dot, very to the point, very punctual. In the United States, we have a pretty monochronic time culture. We like to be punctual and on time for appointments. Polychronic cultures, however, have a much more flexible or more elastic way of looking at time. When somebody might say, hey, let's get together for a party at my house at 4 o'clock, that might mean anywhere from maybe from like 3:45 until maybe 4:35, 5:30, maybe even 6 o'clock in some cultures, where punctuality isn't necessarily as important as it is in contrast with monochronic cultures.